What if the war we're watching unfold between Iran and Israel isn't just political, but prophetic? Missiles streak across the sky, news anchors warn of escalation, and fear spreads across the globe. But beneath the surface, a deeper voice is speaking, one that was written over 2,500 years ago. In the book of Ezekiel, we find a startling prophecy that names Persia, modern-day Iran, as a major player in an end-time war against Israel. That's not a coincidence, that's divine precision. The nations tremble, but the scriptures remain firm. Ezekiel 38 and 39 read like a blueprint for what we're living through. It's not just about governments or nuclear threats, it's about a sovereign God revealing the future in advance. When you hear Iran and Israel and even Gog and Magog, these aren't just news cycle buzzwords. They're chapters from a prophetic script God authored long ago, and now they're beginning to unfold right before our eyes. This is not just a moment of war, it may be a moment of destiny. Ezekiel didn't write to entertain us, he wrote to awaken us. If this prophecy is being fulfilled in our generation, then time is short. And what we do with that time matters more than ever. This isn't just history in motion, it's eternity knocking. The spiritual implications are enormous, and every believer must ask, am I discerning the signs? Am I ready? The real question is this: could today's war be the prelude to the fulfillment of Ezekiel's incredible prophecy? Could this be the stage being set for the final chapters of human history? Don't brush this off. Lean in. What comes next in this prophetic journey could change your entire perspective. If this message resonates with your spirit, don't watch in silence. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notifications, because what's coming next in this series could very well shape your understanding of Bible prophecy forever. To truly understand why Iran plays such a central role in the prophecy of Ezekiel, we need to travel back, far beyond headlines and treaties, to a time when Persia was not Israel's enemy, but her liberator. The story begins with a man named Cyrus. In Isaiah 45:1, God calls him his anointed, even though Cyrus didn't know him. Isn't that incredible? A pagan king used by the Almighty to set his people free. Cyrus conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. That wasn't just political reform, it was prophetic restoration. Persia, in that moment, became a vessel of divine mercy. But history has a way of shifting its course, especially when human pride overtakes divine purpose. Though ancient Persia was used by God to bless Israel, modern Iran has chosen a path of opposition. The real turning point came in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. The Shah was overthrown, and Ayatollah Khomeini rose to power, transforming Iran into a theocratic state rooted in radical Shiite ideology. From that moment on, Iran's mission was clear: destroy Israel, not through diplomacy, but through declaration. Crowds chanting "Death to Israel" became more than rhetoric, they became ritual. It's important for believers to grasp the spiritual shift that occurred here. A nation once known for protecting God's people became obsessed with erasing them. It's no coincidence that this mirrors the spirit behind Gog and Magog. Ezekiel's prophecy wasn't just about geography, it was about alignment. When a nation sets itself against the covenant people of God, it steps onto a prophetic timeline. Iran, once Persia, has moved from prophetic ally to prophetic adversary, and in that transformation, we see the hand of prophecy tightening around history. Even the Book of Esther gives us a glimpse into Persia's deeper spiritual undercurrent. Remember Haman? He plotted to annihilate the Jews while serving in the Persian court, but God overturned his plan. That same spirit of destruction is alive today, but God's covenant hasn't changed. What we're witnessing now in Iran's leadership is the revival of that ancient enmity. Only this time it's unfolding in the context of end-time prophecy. And when we recognize that shift, we begin to understand why Ezekiel singled out Persia. In his vision, So, when we hear the name Iran today, we must remember, it's more than a country. It's a thread in the divine tapestry that stretches from Genesis to Revelation. The journey from Cyrus to Khomeini isn't just political, it's spiritual. And the animosity between Iran and Israel isn't random, it's prophetic. But this is just the beginning. Now that we've uncovered the roots, let's look at how this hostility evolved into open warfare, setting the stage for what Ezekiel foresaw long ago. There was a time when Iran's war against Israel was fought in whispers, in shadows, behind closed doors, and masked operatives. It wasn't the kind of war you saw on breaking news headlines every day. It was subtle, indirect, but deadly. For years, Iran mastered the art of the proxy war, pouring billions into Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. These were not acts of mere charity. They were strategic investments, building a ring of fire around Israel. And to those watching with prophetic eyes, it was clear the coalition described by Ezekiel was assembling quietly, piece by piece, like pawns being arranged on a divine chessboard. Iran's plan was clear: to surround Israel, not with armies bearing their own flag, but with loyal militias whose purpose was singular: the destruction of God's covenant people. Through Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, Iran extended its influence like dark tendrils wrapping around the Holy Land. This was the shadow war: missile stockpiles hidden in tunnels, drone factories built in secret, intelligence agents carrying out assassinations. But let's not forget, the Bible tells us that what's done in darkness will one day be brought into the light, Luke 8:17, and that day is now. Recently, something shifted. The whispers turned into shouts. The proxies stepped aside, and Iran's hand moved into the open. For the first time in decades, direct attacks between Iran and Israel broke out. No more hiding behind Hezbollah, no more plausible deniability. Tehran and Jerusalem, face to face, with missiles flying and casualties mounting. It's a terrifying thing to witness. But for those who know the prophecy of Ezekiel 38, it's not unexpected. It's the natural next step toward fulfillment. Gog and Magog are awakening, and Persia is at their side. This open conflict isn't just military, it's spiritual warfare on a geopolitical scale. When Iran launches missiles at Israel, it's not just a statement of war, it's a rejection of God's covenant with Abraham. It's a modern-day echo of Psalm 83. Come, let us wipe them out as a nation. But here's the truth. Israel's survival doesn't rest on iron domes. It rests on divine promise. And while the world scrambles for peace talks and ceasefires, heaven is preparing for something far greater. Because what man sees as chaos, God has already written as fulfillment. And so, as this shadow war becomes fully illuminated, we must pay attention, not just to the headlines, but to the scriptures, not just to the politics, but to the prophecy. Because when Persia throws off the veil and steps into open confrontation, we are no longer watching preparation, we are witnessing acceleration. And that acceleration leads us straight into the heart of Ezekiel's vision, the coalition of nations that rises against Israel. So let's go deeper. Let's look at the players, the alliances, and what it all means for us today. When Ezekiel penned chapter 38, he wasn't just giving us another vision. He was delivering a roadmap, a spiritual intelligence briefing for the end times. He wrote of a coalition unlike any the world had ever seen, led by a mysterious figure named Gog from the land of Magog. He spoke of alliances so improbable they seemed unthinkable at the time. Yet here we are thousands of years later, and those names, those ancient places, are rising again on today's world stage. This is no coincidence. This is prophecy breathing. Let's walk through Ezekiel 38, 1-6 together. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. These are not just poetic images. Scholars widely identify Magog with regions in and around modern-day Russia. Meshech and Tubal, once obscure tribal names, are often associated with Turkey. Then comes the key name, Persia, which needs no interpretation. That's Iran, listed by name, taking its place among the aggressors. Then we read of Kush, likely modern Sudan or Ethiopia, and Put, ancient Libya. Finally, Gomer and Togarmah, terms many linked to other regions in modern Asia Minor, possibly Eastern Europe or parts of Central Asia. What Ezekiel described is a confederation of nations spanning continents, all with one target: Israel. What ties these nations together? They're not all religiously unified, they're not all economically aligned, but they share one thing: enmity toward Israel. And if you look closely, you'll see it's not just political, it's spiritual. Ezekiel 38:12 tells us their motivation is to seize, spoil, and carry off plunder. But deeper than that is a rage against God's chosen people. It mirrors the ancient hatred rooted in the fall, the serpent's war against the seed. Of the woman, Genesis 3:15. Iran's role, central, explicit, and enduring, isn't accidental. It's prophetic. Persia was named not because of its might, but because of its heart posture against Israel in the last days. But there's a twist. The prophecy also reveals something shocking about God's sovereignty. In Ezekiel 38:4, the Lord says, "I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army." That's right. It's not just human hatred driving this coalition. It's God himself drawing them in. Why? Because he's setting the stage for judgment, for glory, for the world to see that he alone is Lord. It's like a divine trap, merciful, patient, but inevitable. Even the enemies of Israel, even Iran, with all its threats, are being used by God for his greater plan. This should shift the way we look at today's alliances. It's not just geopolitics, it's divine choreography. And as the coalition described in Ezekiel forms before our eyes, we must be spiritually alert, because this isn't about fear, it's about faith. God is in control. And if he's bringing the nations together according to his word, we must ask, what's our role in this story? And what comes next when this mighty coalition finally confronts the God of Israel face to face? So what happens when this vast, terrifying coalition finally reaches the mountains of Israel? Will the Israeli military stop them? Will global alliances intervene? No. What happens next is beyond human strategy. It's a moment when heaven itself invades the battlefield. Ezekiel 38:18 says, "On that day, when Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused." Let that sink in. It's not just Israel responding, it's God. And when his anger is stirred, no weapon formed by man can stand. This is the turning point, when the Lion of Judah roars and the enemies of his people tremble. First comes the earthquake. Ezekiel 38:19-20 describes a quake so massive that it shakes the entire earth. Mountains crumble, walls fall, animals scatter, and even the fish of the sea tremble. This isn't symbolic. It's physical, literal, terrifying. And isn't it amazing how the God who formed the foundations of the earth uses that very earth to make a statement? He shakes creation itself to declare, "I am the Lord." In that moment, every knee, willing or unwilling, begins to bow. But that's just the beginning. God then sends confusion into the enemy ranks. Verse 21 reveals a divine chaos. Every man's sword will be against his brother. The coalition, once unified in hatred, turns on itself. Armies that march together begin to destroy one another. It's like the story of Gideon all over again, Judges 7, where Israel didn't even have to fight. The enemy collapsed in confusion. And just as in Gideon's time, it proves one thing: the battle belongs to the Lord. Then come the final blows. Disease spreads like wildfire. Torrential rain pours down. Hailstones fall with destructive force. And then fire and sulfur, reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah. God is not just defending Israel, he is revealing his holiness. He's not doing it in secret. Ezekiel 38:23 says, "And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations." This is about more than survival. It's about glory. Prophecy meets power, and no one walks away uncertain about who reigns. And so, what seemed to be Israel's doom becomes God's stage. Iran, Gog and Magog, the entire alliance, they fall not to iron domes or human diplomacy, but to divine judgment. This is a moment when prophecy becomes proof, and the God of Israel reveals himself as the defender of his people. But the story doesn't end with victory. It continues into the aftermath. And in that aftermath, God's purpose shines even brighter. The battlefield falls silent. The once mighty coalition lies shattered, not by human hands, but by divine fury. And now, the world stands in awe, stunned by a defeat so total, so supernatural, it demands explanation. But the explanation is already written. Ezekiel 39 opens with the aftermath, and what we find there is not just debris, it's revelation. Verse 12 tells us Israel will spend 7 months burying the dead. Imagine that. A cleanup operation so vast it becomes a national task. This isn't just about decay, it's about purification. God is cleansing the land, both physically and spiritually. But it doesn't stop there. Verses 9-10 tell us the people of Israel will gather the weapons of their enemies and use them as fuel for 7 years. Think about that. The very tools meant to destroy Israel become a source of energy and provision. It's poetic justice, yes, but it's also prophetic fulfillment. When God says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper," Isaiah 54:17, he means it. Even the weaponry of Gog and Persia, of Iran and its allies, becomes a testimony to God's power to turn evil into provision. And then comes the purpose behind it all. Ezekiel 39:7 says, "I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and the nations shall know that I am the Lord." That's it. That's the goal. Not just judgment, not just defense, revelation. This isn't about Israel's pride. It's about God's glory. The world will no longer mock his name. The nations will no longer scoff at prophecy. Even those who once aligned with Gog and Magog will stand in the knowledge that the God of Israel is the one true God. But here's where things take a darker turn. With the enemy coalition destroyed and the world reeling, a vacuum of power emerges. Israel, now safe, becomes the center of global attention, and the stage is set for a charismatic leader to rise, a man who promises peace, who brings order, who seems like a savior, but he is not sent by God. The Bible calls him the Antichrist, 2 Thessalonians 2, and the world, having seen divine judgment, will be desperate enough to follow him. The war of Gog and Magog doesn't end the story. It shifts it into its final act. So, as we look at Iran today, its obsession with Israel, its boldness in aggression, we must remember this: the prophecy doesn't end with their rise, it ends with their fall, and God's glory shining brighter than ever. But what comes after requires even greater discernment, because when the dust settles, deception will rise. And now more than ever, the church must be awake, watching and grounded in truth, which brings us to the most important question of all. Are you spiritually prepared for what comes next? Throughout this exploration, we've journeyed from ancient Persia to modern Iran, tracing the roots of a conflict written thousands of years ago in the prophecy of Ezekiel. We've seen how the shadow wars have shifted into open conflict, how a formidable coalition described by God himself is assembling around Israel, and how divine judgment will decisively turn the tide. The battle isn't just political or military, it's a cosmic drama, a fulfillment of God's sovereign plan unfolding in real time. As the dust settles on the battlefield, the implications ripple far beyond the Middle East. The world will witness God's holiness revealed through Israel's deliverance, but also face the rise of a deceiving leader promising peace. These events challenge every believer to examine their own faith, readiness, and place in this prophetic timeline. The question lingers: are you prepared to stand firm when the final acts of this divine story play out? If this message resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share in the comments the country you're watching from. Your voice matters in this community of faith and vigilance. Stay tuned and stay spiritually awake, because understanding prophecy is not just about knowledge, it's about living in readiness.